All right, so let's dive into all this homesteading stuff you've sent my way.
Yeah.
The star of the show has got to be this Carla Emery book, right?
Of course, the Encyclopedia of Country Living.
Yeah,
Good.
exactly. A classic. We've got articles, too, and some stories from people actually living this life today, both out in the country and, surprisingly, right in the city. So this is going to be like your crash course in self-sufficiency with a little bit of history.
Yeah.
And a whole lot of inspiration.
It's incredible how Carla Emery describes her book as a geological deposit of knowledge.
A geological deposit.
I know, right?
That's a great way to put it. It really captures how much information we're about to dig into.
Yeah.
So she wanted to create this one-stop shop for families who want to take charge of their food.
Right.
Growing it, raising it, preserving it, the whole 9 yards. But you know what really caught my eye?
What's that?
This story about Meredith Richards. She's living in London in a flat. And she's figured out how to make homesteading work there. She grinds her own wheat, buys in bulk, even does something called square-inch gardening. It just shows you that these ideas can work anywhere.
Absolutely. And what's interesting is that Carla Emery doesn't sugarcoat things.
Yeah.
She talks about the pressures that commercial farmers face.
Oh, yeah.
This constant push for efficiency.
Right.
And how that sometimes clashes with what's good for the environment.
Right. It's a good reminder that the food system is complicated. There's not always a simple answer.
For sure.
Okay, so speaking of complicated, let's talk about land.
Yeah, land is essential.
It's the foundation for any homestead. And Carla really stresses how important it is to choose the right spot.
Yeah, think about commuting distance and land prices.
Yeah. You want enough space to do your thing,
Right.
but you don't want to be so far out that you're spending a fortune on gas.
Or isolated from everything.
Exactly. Now, I always think about 3 to 5 acres as a good starting point, but maybe that's just me. What do you think?
3 to 5 acres is a good size for beginners, especially if you want to grow food and raise a few animals.
Yeah.
But it really depends on what your goals are. If you're thinking about market gardening or having more livestock, you might need more space.
Okay.
And then some people are doing amazing things with less than an acre.
Yeah.
These micro-homesteads show that you can be super productive even with limited space.
That's a great point. It's all about figuring out your own vision.
Exactly.
Now, speaking of being smart, Carla also says to be careful about the real estate agent you work with.
Oh, yeah.
Make sure they have a good reputation and understand rural properties. And then this is huge. She talks about contingencies in the sales contract.
Oh, yeah. That's important.
Explain this to me like I'm 5.
Okay, so contingencies are like if then that clauses.
Okay.
You're basically saying if this thing isn't right, then I'm not buying.
Gotcha.
Like making sure you can actually get to the property.
Right.
That the water rights are clear, the septic system is good. Carla gives some examples like what if a neighbor has the right to cross your land?
Oh, wow.
Or the road to your property isn't actually yours to maintain. You don't want any surprises after you sign.
Right. That would be a nightmare.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's say we found the perfect piece of land. Now comes the fun part.
The learning curve.
Exactly. Carla recommends a whole bunch of books, and some of them look pretty intense.
Which ones?
Well, there's Grow It and The Guide to Self-Sufficiency.
Those are good ones.
Those seem straightforward enough, but then there's the Home and Farm Manual.
Oh, yeah.
That sounds seriously old school.
It is. It's from the 1940s.
Wow.
But it covers pretty much everything you can imagine.
Like what?
Building stuff, repairs, raising animals, preserving food.
It's like a time capsule of knowledge.
I know, right?
Yeah.
It's fascinating to see how people did things back then.
Okay, so time travel aside, we need resources for today's homesteader, too.
Of course.
Carla talks about organizations like Acres USA and AgVentures.
Yeah.
What are those all about? Just networking, or is there more to it?
Yeah. It's definitely more than just chatting with other homesteaders.
Okay.
Acres USA is all about ecological agriculture. They focus on sustainable practices, soil health, that kind of stuff.
Gotcha.
They have magazine conferences, a whole community feel.
So lots of ways to connect with like-minded people.
Exactly. And AgVentures is more about connecting farmers with customers.
Okay.
Especially those who are selling directly or have niche products.
Makes sense. So lots of ways to connect with others on this path. Carla also mentions workshops and classes at places like Tillers International and Trumpkinland.
Oh, yeah, those are great.
Now, these aren't your typical cooking classes, are they?
Not unless you're learning to cook over an open fire.
Right.
These places are all about traditional skills.
Okay.
Like at Tillers International, you can learn blacksmithing, woodworking using draft animals.
So skills that were essential back in the day.
Yeah, and they're making a comeback in the self-sufficiency movement.
I love that. Now we've got our land, we're learning the skills, but the big question is energy.
Energy is essential.
Carla dives into all sorts of alternative energy sources, and some of them sound pretty out there.
Like what?
Well, she starts with solar power, which these days is more accessible than ever.
Right.
She even lists suppliers like Abraham Solar and Backwoods Solar Electric Systems. Of course, it all depends on where you live,
Right.
how much sun you get.
Exactly.
No, wind power, I have to admit, this one always seemed a bit romantic to me.
Yeah.
Like something out of a storybook.
But it can be really effective.
Really?
Especially if you live in a windy area. Carla says it can actually be more efficient than solar sometimes.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that.
And she mentions Cumberland General Store for resources.
Okay.
Now, if you're feeling adventurous, she also talks about methane.
Methane.
Yep, like from manure.
Wait, you can make energy from manure?
Apparently so.
Mm-hmm.
But it has limitations.
Like what?
You need fresh manure.
Okay.
It doesn't work as well in cold climates.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And there are some safety concerns. But she mentions successful family-scale methane systems in India.
Oh, wow.
So it's not totally out there. She recommends a resource called methane, planning a digester.
Okay, noted. I'm not sure I'm ready for a manure-powered homestead.
Maybe not yet.
So let's say energy is figured out. Now we need a place to live.
A roof over our heads.
Carla talks about alternative home building, which sounds like it covers everything from log cabins to spaceships.
She does mention a lot of options.
Right. It's a bit overwhelming. Where do you even start?
Well, she recommends an online resource called Sustainable Architecture, Building and Culture.
Okay.
It covers a wide range of building practices, both traditional and modern.
That sounds like a good starting point.
Yeah. And they focus on sustainability and using eco-friendly materials.
Right. And then she lists all these different building options. There's wood, which seems classic, back to basics.
Classic log cabin.
Yeah. And she even mentions this book by D.C. Beardwood, Shelters, Shacks, and Shanties.
I've heard that one's a fun read.
I'll have to check it out. And then there are yurts. I've always been fascinated by those. Those are the round tent-like structures, right?
Exactly. They're traditionally used by nomadic people in Mongolia.
Wow.
They're surprisingly durable and pretty easy to set up and take down.
And they look so cool.
Yeah, Carla gives some resources if you want to learn more.
Okay. And then she mentions earth-sheltered homes.
Oh, yeah, those are interesting.
Remind me, what are those again?
Basically, they're houses that are partially built into the earth.
Oh, right.
They use the ground for insulation, which helps regulate temperature.
So they're kind of like hobbit houses?
Yeah, sort of, but maybe a little more modern.
Okay, so lots of building options to consider. And Carla also mentions the Last Whole Earth catalog.
Another classic.
It's like a Bible for alternative living.
Full of inspiration and practical advice.
Okay, so we've got our energy, we've got a roof over our heads. Now it's time to eat.
The most important part.
But what if you don't have a regular oven?
Interesting question.
I was reading about this woman, Phyllis Villette. She's a Bible translator living in Burkina Faso.
Wow.
And get this, she does all her baking in a Dutch oven.
No way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
She makes bread pizzas, even custard-type pies, all in a Dutch oven.
That's impressive.
And she says it's really fuel efficient.
Yeah, that's a big plus for homesteaders.
Okay, so I'm intrigued. Tell me everything about Dutch oven cooking.
All right, Dutch oven 101.
Hit me with it.
So Dutch ovens are super versatile.
Yeah.
You can use them over an open fire on a stovetop, even buried in coals.
Buried in coals.
Yeah, it's a very old school method.
I love it.
Carla includes this recipe by Brian Pruitt called Campfire Cobbler.
Okay.
It's super easy. You just need a seasoned Dutch oven, some pie crust, your favorite filling.
Sounds delicious.
And you can use whatever fruit is in season.
Perfect. Okay, cobbler, I can handle that. But what about something a little more substantial?
Like a roast.
Yeah, can you actually roast something in a Dutch oven?
Oh yeah, for sure.
Really?
Carla explains how to roast in a Dutch oven, even using a frozen roast.
Okay.
You need some water, seasonings, onions, and a low and slow cooking time.
Low and slow.
I like it. And then if you want to go really old school,
yeah,
Carla describes this method of using a Dutch oven in a hole.
In a hole?
Yeah. You basically build a fire, let it burn down to coals.
Okay.
Nestle the Dutch oven in there, cover it with more coals and dirt.
Wow.
And let it cook for hours.
That's amazing. It's like a natural oven.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've got dinner covered, but what about a little ambiance?
Ambiance.
Yeah, Carla goes into candle making, which honestly I've always wanted to try.
It's a fun project.
So what's the best way to get started?
She describes two main methods for dipped candles.
Okay.
One uses tallow.
Tallow.
That's animal fat.
Oh, okay.
It's pretty simple. You just repeatedly dip a wick into melted tallow, letting it harden between dips.
And you can make multiple candles at once, right?
Yeah.
By attaching several wicks to a stick.
Exactly.
That's so cool.
The other method uses beeswax.
Okay.
And here's the cool part. You alternate dipping the wick in melted beeswax and then into ice water.
Ice water?
Yeah. It creates these beautiful layered candles.
Wow.
With a unique texture.
I love it.
Okay.
Okay, so candles are lit, dinner's cooking.
This is getting cozy.
But have you ever thought about turning your homesteading skills into a business?
A homestead business?
Yeah. Like selling your homemade food products.
It's definitely possible.
Carla talks about the challenges and rewards.
What are some of the challenges?
Well, she stresses how important it is to understand FDA regulations.
Oh, yeah.
Making sure your products are safe and labeled correctly.
Food safety is essential.
Exactly. And she recommends this program at the University of Nebraska.
What's it called?
The Food Entrepreneur Assistance Program.
Okay.
They have seminars on all sorts of business stuff.
Like what?
Marketing, research, packaging, labeling.
So all the practical aspects of running a food business.
Exactly. It's a great resource for anyone who wants to take their homesteading skills to the next level.
Yeah.
For sure. Okay, now, for a topic that can be a little scary. Lyme disease. Living so close to nature, it's definitely something to be aware of.
Absolutely. Carla says the first step is to figure out if Lyme disease is even a concern in your area.
Okay.
Do you have deer mice, those pesky deer ticks?
Right.
And if so, do the ticks actually carry Lyme disease?
So if the answer is no, you can breathe a sigh of relief.
Exactly. But let's say Lyme disease, a risk.
Yeah.
What should people be looking for?
Well, Carla breaks down the 3 stages of Lyme disease.
Okay.
Stage 1 symptoms usually show up within a few weeks of a tick bite.
Like what?
Think bullseye rash fever, chills, fatigue, muscle aches, that sort of thing.
Those are the early signs.
Yeah. And stage 2 can involve heart or nervous system problems.
So early detection is crucial.
Exactly. And if it goes untreated, it can progress to stage 3, which can have really serious long-term consequences.
That's scary.
It is. The key takeaway here is if you're in an area where Lyme disease is prevalent and you notice any weird symptoms after a tick bite, don't wait. Go see a doctor right away.
Definitely better safe than sorry.
Okay, so let's lighten the mood a bit. Carla actually includes some fun activities in the Encyclopedia.
Oh, that's cool.
I love that. It's not all just hard work and survival.
Right.
She has recipes for making giant bubbles.
Giant bubbles.
Yeah, I'm picturing those floating over a field. It's so whimsical.
I love it.
And she also has a recipe for homemade modeling clay.
Perfect for keeping the kids entertained.
Exactly. It's a good reminder that homesteading is about creating a fulfilling life.
Yeah.
And sometimes that means having some fun.
For sure.
Okay, so back to practical matters. Water testing.
Important.
If you're relying on a well, you need to know what's in your water.
Exactly. Carla mentions those basic test kits you can get from places like Lowe's.
Yeah.
They check for things like sediment chlorine fluoride.
But for really thorough analysis, she recommends going with a professional lab.
Like who?
She mentions national testing laboratories.
Right.
They have all sorts of tests. One that checks for over 75 contaminants. Another that includes pesticides. They even have specific tests for lead and bacteria.
That's good to know.
The bacteria test is important, but there's a catch.
What's that?
The lab needs to receive the water sample within 30 hours for accurate results.
Oh, wow. So you got to act fast.
Exactly. And if you really want to get into the weeds, Carla lists the 94 most common water pollutants.
94?
Yeah, it's a lot. We won't go through the whole list now, but it's pretty eye-opening.
It makes you realize how important water quality is.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so let's say our water is good. Now, how about keeping things clean?
Cleaning.
Carla has a whole section on cleaning solutions, and I am all about ditching those harsh chemicals.
Me too.
So what are some of her favorite natural cleaners?
Well, one of her go-tos is a sink stain remover using lemon juice and borax or baking soda.
Oh, that's a good one.
The lemon juice acts as a natural bleach, and the borax or baking soda provides scrubbing power.
Nice. And I've heard that vinegar is good for cleaning, too. Does she have any vinegar-based solutions?
Oh, yeah. For mildew in the shower or tub, she recommends a diluted white vinegar solution. Just 2 teaspoons of vinegar in a quart of warm water.
Easy peasy.
And for a scouring powder, you can use either borax or baking soda.
Okay.
They're both naturally abrasive.
Yeah.
So they clean effectively without harsh chemicals.
What about the toilet bowl?
Right.
Any natural solutions for that?
She suggests a mixture of baking soda and vinegar.
The classic combo.
Just sprinkle baking soda on the bowl, drizzle some vinegar on top, and scrub away.
Perfect. It cleans, deodorizes, and it's totally safe.
Exactly.
I love these simple solutions. They're good for the environment, and they probably save you a ton of money.
Right.
Now, speaking of resourcefulness, Carla tells a story about living in a house without running water.
No running water.
Yeah, and she had to rely on hand pumps.
Wow, that's hardcore.
It is. But it's kind of inspiring, too. You know, that homesteading spirit of adapting to whatever life throws at you.
I agree. She even mentions a supplier, Rintoul's hand pumps, for anyone looking for a reliable manual water source.
So if the power goes out, you're good to go.
Exactly.
All right, so water sorted. Now let's talk soil. Carla stresses the importance of understanding your soil's pH.
Soil pH.
Yeah, why is that so crucial?
Well, pH affects nutrient availability for plants.
Okay.
Some nutrients are more available at certain pH levels.
Gotcha.
So knowing your soil's pH helps you adjust it to create the best growing conditions.
Makes sense.
Oh.
So how do you actually figure out your soil's pH?
She recommends contacting your local cooperative extension service,
Okay.
or you can use a simple soil tester.
Yeah, those are pretty easy to find.
And if you're not sure where to start, she always advises adding compost.
Compost is like the magic ingredient.
It really is.
Yeah.
It helps balance pH naturally.
Now, I noticed she mentions professional soil tests, too. What's the difference between those and a DIY test?
Professional tests go deeper.
Okay.
They analyze either the elemental mineral content of your soil,
Like what?
nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, things like that,
Okay.
or they look at the humus, organic matter, and the life forms present in your soil.
Wow. So it's like a full health checkup for your soil.
Exactly. And she mentions a publication called Farmer to Farmer,
Mm-hmm.
which has information on microbial biomass and activity tests.
So that's getting into the really nitty-gritty.
Yeah. It's all about the health of your soil's ecosystem.
Okay, so soil analyzed.
Yeah.
Now let's talk tools. Carla is a big fan of using hand tools for gardening.
Yeah.
And I have to say, I love the idea of getting back to that hands-on connection with the earth.
It's a different experience.
It is. It's so much more grounding than using power equipment.
She recommends some resources.
Oh, yeah.
There's How to Select, Use, and Maintain Garden Equipment, Down to Earth, Home and Garden,
Okay.
and Walt Nicky's catalog, which focuses specifically on hand tools.
I'll have to check those out. But
Okay.
for someone who's never really used hand tools before, where do you even begin?
She walks you through the basic steps of hand tilling.
Okay.
You start by loosening the soil with a spade or a spading fork.
All right.
Then you break up any big clods with a hoe, and
Yeah.
finally you rake the soil smooth.
So it's not just about digging a hole. There's a real art to it.
It is. There's a technique to it.
Okay, so the soil is prepped. Now we have to decide how we're going to prepare our garden beds.
Right.
Carla talks about two main methods.
Which one?
Single digging and double digging.
Okay.
So break this down for me. What's the difference?
Single digging is pretty straightforward.
Okay.
You remove the topsoil, loosen the subsoil underneath, add some fertilizer and compost, and then put the topsoil back on top.
It's just a little soil sandwich.
It is. And it's a good basic method for most gardens.
Now, double digging sounds way more intense.
It is. It's a lot more work.
So what's the benefit of going to all that extra effort?
Well, you're loosening the soil to a greater depth, usually 24 inches.
Wow.
It's great for improving drainage and aeration, especially if you have heavy clay soil.
So you're creating a really welcoming environment for those roots.
Exactly. But it's not for everyone.
Right. Not everyone has the time or energy for double digging.
And Carla acknowledges that. She mentions using a no-till system,
Okay.
where you avoid digging altogether.
Interesting.
She also gives instructions for preparing later gardens using a simplified spading method.
So a kind of compromise between single digging and double digging.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so we've covered the basics of gardening, but what about those who are dreaming bigger?
Dreaming bigger.
Yeah, like incorporating livestock or going really old school with their farming practices.
Well, if you're talking old school, Carla has a whole section on animal traction.
Animal traction.
Yeah, using draft animals like horses or oxen for farm work.
Now that sounds like a blast from the past. Are people actually still doing that these days?
You might be surprised.
Really?
There's a growing interest in using draft animals, especially among those who are into sustainable agriculture.
I can see the appeal. They're strong, and they don't rely on fossil fuels.
Exactly. Carla recommends Small Farmer's Journal as a great resource for all things draft animal related.
Okay.
And she also mentions this bookstore, the Mishka Farm Draft Horse Bookstore.
That sounds like a treasure trove of information.
It is. She lists several books that she considers essential reading.
Like what?
Draft Horses,
Yeah.
an owner's manual, work horse handbook.
Wow.
Even books on training both the horses and the teamsters.
It's incredible to think about harnessing that kind of animal power.
It's a real connection to the land.
Okay, but I imagine you need specialized equipment to actually work with draft animals, right?
You do. And that's where things can get tricky.
How so?
Well, finding horse and oxen-drawn implements can be a challenge.
Like what kind of implements?
Plows, cultivators, things like that.
Okay.
You might have to get creative and renovate existing equipment to suit your needs.
So it's a bit of a treasure hunt.
Yeah, you could say that.
All right, shifting gears a bit, let's talk about composting. Specifically, worm composting.
Worm composting.
Yeah, I'll admit this one always seemed a little intimidating to me, but maybe Carla can demystify it for us.
Worm composting is a great way to turn your food scraps and other organic matter into nutrient-rich compost.
Okay, I'm listening. Tell me more.
You basically need a worm bin with the right kind of bedding.
Like what?
Shredded newspaper or cardboard work well.
Okay.
Then you add your food scraps and other organic materials, and the worms do the work.
So they break everything down into compost.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But then how do you get the compost out without getting a bunch of worms in your garden?
That's what I've always wondered.
Well, there are a couple of methods. One involves moving the old bedding to one side of the bin,
Okay.
adding fresh bedding, and letting the worms migrate to the new stuff.
Oh, that's smart.
And then you can just scoop out the finished compost from the old bedding.
I like that method. The other one involves using light, right?
Yeah. You shine a bright light on the compost, and the worms, being light sensitive, burrow deeper into the pile.
Okay.
Then you can carefully remove layers of compost until you reach the worms.
And then you transfer the worms to a new bin.
Exactly. It's pretty clever.
It is. All right. Worm composting checked off the list. Now let's talk about organic gardening.
One of my favorite topics.
Mine too. Carla dedicates a good chunk of the encyclopedia to it.
Yeah. She recommends several books that are essential for organic gardeners.
What?
The New Organic Manifesto, Profitable Organic Farming,
Okay.
Rodale's all-new Encyclopedia of Organic Gardening, Organic Farming and Growing,
Yeah.
and Rodale's Successful Organic Gardening, Vegetables.
So those cover everything you need to know.
They do, from soil health to pest control.
And she mentioned some reputable publishers too. Rodale Press, Chelsea Green Storybooks.
Those are the good ones.
Yeah, those are names I trust. But what about actually sourcing pure food?
Pure food.
Yeah, finding food that's truly organic and free from harmful additives.
Right. Well, Carla mentions organizations like Biodemocracy and the Organic Consumers Association.
Okay.
They advocate for sustainable food systems and provide information on where to find organic and locally grown food.
That's awesome. And for regional resources, she mentions the California Certified Organic Farmers and the Canadian Organic Growers. So it's all about connecting with like-minded folks in your area.
Exactly.
Now, speaking of connecting, have you ever thought about participating in a seed exchange?
A seed exchange.
Yeah. You get together with other gardeners
Yeah.
and swap seeds that you've saved from your own gardens.
It's a great way to diversify your garden. You get locally adapted seeds and you connect with other passionate growers.
I love that idea. It's like community building through gardening.
Exactly.
Okay, so now Carla gets into some pretty detailed stuff about onion classification.
Onion classification.
Yeah. Is this something the average gardener really needs to worry about?
It's fascinating stuff if you're a plant nerd.
Okay.
But for most gardeners, understanding the basic categories of onions, like short day, long day, and day neutral is enough.
All right, fair enough. But what about seed saving in general? Is that something that's achievable for the average homesteader?
Oh, absolutely.
Really?
Carla emphasizes the importance of using locally adapted seeds. They're already accustomed to your specific climate and soil.
Yeah.
And saving your own seeds helps preserve those unique varieties.
That's important. But some seeds need special treatment before they'll germinate, right?
Right.
Like cold stratification.
Cold stratification.
Yeah, I always forget what that is. Remind me.
It basically mimics winter.
Okay.
You expose the seeds to cold temperatures for a certain amount of time.
To trigger germination.
Exactly.
And what about germination rates? How do you know if your seeds are still good?
That's a good question. Germination rates tell you what percentage of seeds are likely to sprout.
Okay.
You can test seed viability by placing a small sample on a moist paper towel and seeing how many germinate.
So it's a little science experiment.
It is.
All right, now let's talk about extending the growing season. Carla mentions Cold frames.
Cold frame.
Yeah, are those like mini greenhouses?
You're on the right track.
Okay.
A cold frame is basically a bottomless box with a glass or plastic lid. It creates a microclimate trapping heat and protecting plants from frost.
So you can start seeds earlier in the spring
Right.
and keep things going later into the fall.
Exactly.
I love that. And Carla says they're especially good for growing oriental greens.
Like what kind?
Mustard greens and edible chrysanthemum.
Yeah.
And for even more warmth, you can create a hotbed.
A hotbed.
Yeah, you add a layer of manure to the cold frame.
Manure.
Yeah, the decomposing manure generates heat.
Oh, that's clever.
It is. Okay, so cold frames for a little extra warmth. But what about going all out with a greenhouse?
Greenhouses.
Yeah, Carla highlights solar greenhouses.
Solar greenhouses.
Yeah, they're designed to maximize passive solar heating.
Right.
So you rely less on external energy sources.
That's great, which can be really helpful in those colder months.
It is. So it's like tucking the wheat in for winter.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now, Carla also talks about stooling.
Stooling.
Have you ever heard of that?
Not when it comes to plants.
Well, it's when a grain plant sends out multiple shoots from its base. So you get more grain heads per plant.
That's cool.
It is.
Yeah.
But you need to make sure the plants don't get too crowded.
Right. They need their space.
Exactly. Okay, so we've got our grain variety. We've prepped the soil. Now, how do we plant those seeds?
All right, let's get those seeds in the ground.
Carla talks about two main methods, drilling and broadcasting.
Okay.
Drilling uses a seed drill,
Yeah.
which plants the seeds in rows at a consistent depth.
But I'm guessing most homesteaders aren't using those big fancy drills.
Probably not. That's where broadcasting comes in.
Broadcasting?
Yeah, it's basically scattering the seeds over the soil.
By hand.
You can do it by hand or with a spreader.
Okay.
It's simpler and good for smaller plots or if the ground's too wet for a drill.
So it's all about working with what you've got.
Exactly. Now, once that grain has grown tall and golden, it's time for the harvest.
The moment of truth. But I imagine that's a lot of work, especially without modern machinery.
It can be. Carla talks about using a sickle or a scythe for mowing the grain.
Those curved blades, you see them in all those old paintings?
Exactly. They take some practice to use, though.
I bet. Have you ever used one?
I've tried my hand at a scythe.
Yeah.
It's definitely a skill. It's all about that smooth swing.
I can imagine.
So once the grain is cut, what happens next?
Well, back in the day, they used to bind the grain into sheaves, right?
Yeah, those bundles of stalks tied together.
To help them dry.
Exactly. And then they'd stand them upright in shocks or stacks to let the air circulate.
So much work.
It was. And then comes the threshing.
Threshing.
Yeah, separating the grain kernels from the stalks and chaff.
Okay.
Carla talks about threshing machines, which were a huge innovation.
Right. They must have saved a lot of time and effort.
They did. But before those machines, it was all done by hand.
Really? So how did they do it?
They'd use flails or other tools to beat the grain,
Wow.
and then they'd winnow it.
Winnowing.
Yeah, using the wind to blow away the lighter chaff.
Okay. So the whole process was super labor intensive.
It was. It really makes you appreciate the food we have today.
It does. Okay, so we've harvested our grain. Now we need to store it properly, right?
Absolutely. We don't want it to go to waste.
What are some best practices for storing grain?
Well, Carla emphasizes dryness, air circulation, and pest control.
Those are the key factors.
Yeah, she mentions a few different storage options.
Okay.
Sacks, like gunny sacks, are good for smaller quantities.
Okay.
Just store them on end in a dry area with good ventilation.
What about something more airtight?
Cans, either metal or plastic, are good for keeping pests out.
Okay.
Just make sure those metal cans are stored off the ground.
To prevent rusting.
Exactly. And for larger quantities, she talks about grain bins.
Grain bins?
Yeah, those purpose-built structures designed for storing grain.
So it's like a little grain house.
Basically, usually made of wood or metal and keep the grain dry, cool, and pest-free.
Okay, so grain safely stored. Now the fun part, cooking.
Time to eat.
But cooking whole grains can be a bit intimidating. Any tips for making it easier?
Carla suggests a few methods. You can use a double boiler, a pressure cooker, even a regular pan.
Okay.
She gives approximate cooking times for different grains, but it's always a good idea to check for doneness.
Right. It's not an exact science.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And she has this great tip for making homemade quick cooking cereal.
Oh, tell me about that.
You basically pre-cook and soak the grains ahead of time.
Okay.
So they cook up super fast in the morning.
Perfect for those busy mornings.
Exactly. Now let's talk about some specific grains, starting with amaranth.
Amaranth.
Yeah. Have you ever tried it?
Not yet. What's so special about it?
Well, it's a nutritional powerhouse. It's packed with protein fiber iron,
Wow.
and it's gluten-free.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
Plus, it's adaptable to different climates and soil types.
So a good choice for homesteaders.
Definitely. Where can you even find amaranth seeds? I've never seen them at my local garden center.
Right, they're not as common. Carla lists a few seed sources.
Like who?
Abundant Life Gurney Johnny's Salt Spring Seeds.
Okay.
Seeds of Change Southern Exposure Seed Exchange.
Hmm.
Bountiful Gardens and New World Foods.
Those are some good ones.
So lots of options.
Oh.
Okay, so seeds secured. How do you plant this amaranth?
She recommends planting the seeds no more than a ½ inch deep
Mhm.
and spacing them about 6–10 inches apart in rows that are 2–3 feet apart.
Got it. All right, shifting gears completely, bamboo.
Bamboo.
I know it's super fast growing, but isn't it also kind of invasive?
That can be a problem. Carla talks about its hardiness and how it loves fertile soil and warmth,
Okay.
but she also warns about that root system. It can spread like crazy if you're not careful.
So how do you keep bamboo from taking over your entire property?
She suggests a few methods. Planting within a root barrier, like a deep trench lined with metal or concrete,
Okay.
that can help contain the roots.
Mhm.
Or you can grow bamboo in large containers.
So it's like putting it in a timeout.
Exactly. It keeps it from running wild. Now, there are different types of bamboo, too.
Oh, yeah.
There's the invasive varieties like Philistachys
Mhm.
and the clumping varieties like bambusa.
So what's the difference?
Invasive ones spread aggressively through underground runners,
Oh.
while the clumping types stay in a more manageable clump.
So choose wisely.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Okay, let's move on to a more familiar grain. Barley.
Parley.
I know it's used in beer, but what else is it good for?
Well, I'll admit I'm not a huge fan of rye bread, but I'm open to trying other rye-based dishes. What does Carla have to say about it?
Well, she highlights rye's hardiness and adaptability to cool climates and poor soils.
So it can handle some tough conditions.
It can. It tolerates sandy, acidic, low-fertility soils.
That's impressive. How does it compare to wheat and barley?
Well, rye grows taller than both wheat and barley,
Okay.
and it has a bearded seed head similar to barley.
Interesting.
It's also easy to thresh.
What's threshing again?
That's the process of separating the grain from the stalks.
Right.
And it's resistant to pests and diseases.
So it's a pretty low-maintenance grain.
You could say that. She also suggests using rye as a cover crop or green manure.
Okay.
And if you're looking for culinary inspiration, she includes recipes for brewis.
Brewis.
It's a savory bread pudding. She also has recipes for crumb pancakes, recycled bread pudding stuffing recipes,
Wow.
herby buttered rye Melba crackers, and quick rye crackers.
Those actually sound pretty good.
They do. I'm starting to see the appeal of rye myself.
Me too. Okay, so we've talked a lot about different types of grains, but what about noodles? Aren't those usually made from wheat flour?
Most commercially produced noodles are, but Carla gives recipes for homemade noodles
Really?
using simple ingredients like eggs, salt, and flour.
Awesome.
She even has a recipe for delicious eggy noodles
Oh, yeah.
that include cream or milk for richer flavor.
Yeah. And I saw a recipe for leftover yolks noodles.
Oh, yeah.
What a great way to use up those extra yolks.
I know, right? No waste.
So making your own noodles might seem intimidating, but Carla makes it sound pretty approachable.
She does. She breaks down the process step by step.
Perfect. Okay, noodles checked off the list. Now let's go back in time a little bit and talk about boiled-in-a-bag pudding.
Boiled-in-a-bag pudding.
Yeah, what's the story behind that?
Well, Carla explains that it was common in colonial times.
Okay.
Back then, households often only had one large kettle for cooking.
Makes sense.
So they'd tie puddings, breads, even savory dishes in a cloth bag and boil them in the kettle.
So it's like a multi-cooker method.
Exactly. They were maximizing cooking space and fuel efficiency.
Pretty ingenious.
It is. But what kind of cloth did they use?
That's a good question. I imagine the pudding would just leak out.
Well, Carla specifies undyed white cotton, like a diaper,
Okay.
dipped in hot water and rubbed with flour on the inside to prevent sticking.
Interesting.
Then you fill the bag with your pudding batter, tie it securely, and plop it into the boiling water.
I love it. It's like a little edible present.
Right. Okay, let's fast forward a few centuries and talk about a holiday classic fruitcake.
Fruitcake.
Does Carla have a good recipe?
She does. It's a molasses fruitcake packed with dried fruits, nuts, and spices.
Oh, that sounds good.
It does. She describes soaking the fruits in brandy or rum, creaming the butter and sugar, adding the molasses.
It's a labor of love.
It is, but I bet the end result is delicious.
That rich, boozy flavor.
I can almost taste it.
She even recommends lining the loaf pans with foil or parchment paper to prevent sticking.
Good tip.
Okay, let's move on to root vegetables.
Carla covers a whole bunch of them.
She does. Everything from the familiar to the more exotic.
Give me the rundown.
Okay, so she lists garlic,
Mm-hmm.
Jerusalem, artichoke leek, onion, parsnip, potato.
Those are the classics.
Yeah, and then she gets into rutabaga, salsify, scorzonera.
Salsa.
Yeah, it's a type of black salsify.
Okay.
And then there's skirret turnip and water chestnut.
Wow. That's quite a list.
It is. It's a reminder that there's so much more to explore in the world of vegetables.
Beyond the usual supermarket staples.
Exactly. Now, we can't talk about a homesteading diet without mentioning leafy greens.
Leafy greens.
They're packed with nutrients and so versatile.
Carla breaks them down into two main groups. Non-brassicas and brassicas.
Okay, remind me again, what's the difference?
Non-brassicas include things like New Zealand spinach chicories, dandelions, goosefoot greens, corn salad.
They're not as closely related to cabbage and its relatives as the brassicas are.
Okay, so what about the brassicas?
That's where you get all those cabbage-like greens.
Okay.
Brussels sprouts, cabbage itself, Chinese cabbage, broccoli, cauliflower, kohlrabi.
Yeah.
Kale, collards, mustard greens.
So many options, but what about preserving those greens? I know they don't last forever in the fridge.
Right. Carla recommends blanching greens to preserve their color, flavor, and nutrients.
Blanching.
Yeah. It's basically a quick dip in boiling water followed by an ice bath.
Okay.
It stops the cooking process and deactivates enzymes that can cause the greens to deteriorate.
So it helps them keep longer.
Exactly. And it makes them suitable for freezing or other preservation methods.
Good to know. Okay, so greens prepped. Now how about dressing them up?
Salad dressing.
Carla has a recipe for Thousand Island dressing.
Oh yeah, the classic.
It's made with mayonnaise, ketchup, parsley, onion, hard-boiled egg, green pepper, and either basil or dill.
So many flavors.
I know, right? And Carla is all about making your own dressings to control the ingredients and avoid all those additives and preservatives in store-bought versions.
It's definitely healthier and probably tastes better too.
All right, let's talk about some specific leafy greens, starting with New Zealand spinach. I've never actually tried that one.
It's a great alternative to regular spinach, especially in warmer climates.
Really? How so?
Well, it's more heat tolerant and resistant to pests and diseases.
Okay.
It grows as a ground cover with these succulent, triangular-shaped leaves.
Sounds interesting.
And Carla gives instructions for planting and saving seed.
All right, so New Zealand spinach noted. Now, what about chicories? I've had radicchio in salads, but I'm not really familiar with the other types.
Carla describes all sorts of chicories.
Okay, like what?
Endive and escarole have a slightly bitter flavor and are often used in salads or braised dishes.
Okay.
Radicchio is more bitter and is often grilled or roasted to mellow it out. And then there's whitloaf, also known as Belgian endive.
Okay.
It's grown for its pale yellow heads, which are prized for their delicate flavor and crunchy texture.
So each one has its own unique personality.
Exactly. Carla includes a recipe for grilled radicchio, which sounds delicious.
Oh, okay.
And she even explains how to force whitloaf roots to produce those pale yellow heads.
That's cool.
Ah.
Okay, now for a leafy green, that's often considered a weed, dandelion.
Dandelion.
Yeah, I know some people eat the greens, but can you really eat the whole plant?
Carla says you can.
Really?
She highlights the dandelion as a super versatile and nutritious plant.
Okay, I'm listening.
She explains how to use the greens, the buds, the roots, even the chicons.
The chicons.
You can force them from the roots, similar to whitloaf.
So it's like a multi-purpose superfood.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And she gives instructions for harvesting and preparing each part.
Like how?
Adding the greens to salads.
Yeah.
Using the buds in stir fries, roasting the roots.
Wow. It's amazing how something we usually consider a weed can be so useful.
Right. It's all about perspective.
Now let's move on to Chinese cabbage. It's a staple in so many Asian cuisines.
Yeah. There are different types, though.
I know I've seen Napa cabbage and bok choy at the store, but I'm not sure I could tell you the difference.
Well, Carla explains that there are heading and non-heading varieties.
Okay.
Heading varieties like Napa cabbage form compact heads.
Like regular cabbage.
Exactly. And non-heading varieties like bok choy have loose, open leaves.
Got it.
Okay.
So how do you grow this Chinese cabbage? Any special requirements?
She gives instructions for planting and harvesting.
Okay.
It prefers cool weather and should be spaced about 12-18 inches apart in rows.
All right. And it's delicious in stir fries, right?
Oh, yeah. She includes recipes for stir-fried Chinese cabbage, a refreshing Chinese cabbage salad, and even cabbage rolls.
Ooh, cabbage roll.
You can make them with either heading or non-heading varieties.
Cool. Okay. Moving on to another familiar face, cauliflower.
Cauliflower.
I love roasted cauliflower, but I've never tried growing it myself. Is it difficult?
It can be a little finicky.
Okay.
Carla says it needs consistent moisture and fertile soil.
So it's a bit high maintenance.
You could say that she stresses the importance of timing the harvest.
Why is that?
You want to pick the heads before they start to open and flower.
Oh, okay.
Otherwise, they get all fuzzy. Right. And she gives instructions for storing cauliflower.
Like,
You can pack it in damp sand in a root cellar or freeze it for later use.
so you can enjoy cauliflower even after the growing season is over.
Exactly. Now, what about kohlrabi? Have you ever tried that one?
I haven't. What is it exactly?
It's another member of the brassica family, and it has this edible bulb that grows above ground.
Above ground.
Yeah. It looks kind of like a turnip, but the bulb can be pale green or purple.
So it's a pretty unique looking vegetable.
It is. Carla gives instructions for planting and harvesting.
Okay.
It prefers cool weather and should be spaced about 6 to 8 inches apart.
Got it.
And she shares a recipe for kohlrabi with greens.
All right. I'm adding kohlrabi to my list of vegetables to try.
Good choice. Now, what about broccoli rab?
Broccoli rab.
It's also known as rapini.
Okay. I've seen that at the store, but I've never cooked with it.
It's basically the flowering stems of a type of turnip.
Oh, interesting.
It has a slightly bitter flavor and is popular in Italian cuisine. Carla gives instructions for planting and harvesting. It can be grown in both spring and fall,
Right.
and you want to harvest it before the flower buds open.
Got it. Now, for a vegetable that requires a bit of patience, asparagus.
Asparagus.
I've always wanted to have my own asparagus patch, but it takes a few years to establish a bed, right?
It does, but Carla says it's worth the wait.
I believe it. Those fresh spears are so delicious.
She explains that it's best to choose male plants for higher yields.
Male plants.
Yeah. And she gives instructions for planting, harvesting, and preserving asparagus.
You can preserve asparagus?
You can freeze it, can it, or even pickle it.
Pickled asparagus.
I know, right? She includes a recipe for it.
I'll have to check that out. Now, for a vegetable that I've always struggled to grow, celery.
Celery. What's the problem?
I've tried growing it before, but the stalks were always so skinny and the flavor wasn't great.
Carla says that celery needs a lot of water, fertile soil, and cool temperatures.
So it's a bit fussy.
Yeah. She also explains the process of blanching celery. Yeah. It's basically shielding the stalks from sunlight
Okay.
to reduce chlorophyll production and make the flavor milder.
So that's why some celery stalks are white.
Exactly. And she gives instructions for storing celery either in a root cellar or by freezing it.
Good tips. Now, for a vegetable that always seems so elegant, globe artichokes.
Globe artichokes.
I love those steamed with butter, but I've never grown them myself.
They're perennials in warmer climates.
Okay.
Then they're propagated through suckers.
Suckers.
Yeah. Shoots that emerge from the base of the plant.
So it's like a self-propagating plant.
You could say that Carla gives instructions for planting and harvesting.
Okay.
They prefer well-drained soil and full sun.
Got it. All right, let's move on to a garden favorite, peas.
Peas.
I love fresh peas right off the vine, but I've always struggled to get a good long harvest.
Carla emphasizes the importance of timing the harvest.
Okay.
You want to pick those pods when they're young and plump?
Makes sense. Otherwise, they get all starchy.
Right. And she gives instructions for supporting the vines with trellises or stakes.
So they don't rot on the ground.
Exactly. And when it comes to picking those pods, she says to snap them off with a gentle twist.
All right, now let's talk about another type of legume, shell beans.
Shell beans.
Yeah, there are so many different kinds, and they're so versatile.
They are. I love dried beans, but I've never tried drying them myself.
Is that something you can do at home?
Oh yeah, for sure. Carla explains that you can dry shell beans on or off the vine.
What's the difference?
Well, drying them on the vine lets them mature and dry naturally,
Okay.
but it can be tricky in humid climates, or if there's rain.
So what's the alternative?
You can pick the pods and spread them out to dry in a dry area location.
Okay.
Just make sure to start drying process quickly to prevent mold.
Good tip. Okay, so beans dried. Now what?
You got to thresh them.
Threshing.
Yeah, separating the beans from the pods. You can do it by
Okay.
hand or use a mechanical thresher.
And then you have to store them properly.
Exactly. In airtight containers in a cool, dry place.
All right, so that's how you get those beautiful dried beans. Now, what's the best way to cook them? I know some people soak them overnight, but is that really necessary?
Carla does recommend soaking.
Okay.
It reduces cooking time and makes them easier to digest.
Right.
And she suggests cooking them in the water they were soaked in.
To retain nutrients.
Exactly. Now, cooking times vary depending on the type of bean.
Right, so you have to kind of play it by ear.
She gives approximate times, but it's always good to check for doneness.
And what about using a pressure cooker? Does that speed things up?
Oh yeah, for sure.
But I've heard you can't pressure cook all types of beans.
That's true. She cautions against pressure cooking certain beans, like limas, black-eyed peas, garbanzos, and lentils.
Why is that?
They tend to foam a lot and can clog the pressure cooker's vent.
Oh, wow. Good to know.
And if you're not in a hurry, she has a recipe for oven-cooked beans.
Oven-cooked beans.
Yeah, you just bake them in a low oven overnight.
Sounds super easy.
It is. Okay, let's focus on a specific type of bean.
Black beans.
Black beans. They're so versatile and delicious.
I love black beans. What are some of Carla's favorite ways to use them?
Well, she highlights their popularity and versatility.
Mm-hmm.
You can use them in soups, stews, salads, dips, pretty much anything.
I know, right?
She includes a recipe for a vegetarian feijoada.
A feijoada? What's that?
It's a Brazilian stew.
Oh, cool.
And she also has a recipe for kidney bean hamburger chili.
Those both sound delicious.
Mm.
Okay, now for another legume that's known for its quick cooking time, lentils.
Lentils.
They're a weeknight staple in my house.
I know, right? They cook up so fast.
And they're so good for you.
Carla says they're a good source of protein, fiber, iron, and other essential nutrients.
Perfect. So how long do they usually take to cook?
About 20, 30 minutes.
That's why I love them.
And she shares a couple of recipes, one for lentils and cheese, and another for honey-baked lentils.
Honey-baked lentils.
Yeah, they're sweet and savory with a touch of spice.
I have to try that one. Okay, so we've talked about black beans and lentils. What about southern peas?
Southern peas.
Are those the same as black-eyed peas?
Black-eyed peas are a type of southern pea.
Oh, okay.
But there are lots of other varieties, too, like cow peas and crowder peas.
I've never heard of crowder peas.
They're all known for being heat-tolerant and drought-resistant.
So good for those hot, dry summers.
Exactly. And they're nutritious adaptable.
Yeah.
You can even use them as a green manure crop or for livestock feed.
So they're like the multi-talented members of the legume family.
You could say that.
Wow. It's amazing how much we've covered just thinking about all this homesteading knowledge.
It's a lot to take in.
It is. We've talked about everything from finding land and building a home to growing food, preserving the harvest, and cooking delicious meals.
It's all there.
It really is. Carla Emery's Encyclopedia is like a treasure chest of wisdom.
A geological deposit.
Exactly. You know, one thing that really stood out to me is how adaptable all these principles are.
Oh, yeah.
Like we talked about that woman in London who's making it work in her city flat. It shows you don't need acres of land to be self-sufficient.
It's more mindset.
Yeah, it's about being resourceful, creative, and willing to experiment.
And willing to get your hands dirty.
For sure.
Yeah.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I'm curious what resonated with you the most.
Yeah.
What sparked your interest?
What are you going to try first?
Exactly. Maybe you're feeling inspired to start a garden or try some of those Dutch oven recipes.
Or maybe you're ready to ditch those harsh chemicals and make your own cleaning solutions.
The possibilities are endless. And remember, homesteading is a journey, not a destination.
It's about continuous learning.
Right.
Adapting to challenges and finding joy in the simple things.
Beautifully said. Who knows? Maybe someday you'll be sharing your own homesteading knowledge with the world.
Inspiring others to connect with the land and live a more fulfilling life.
That's what it's all about.